Cloud.
Started. Thanks.
Oh, ni Dave. Wala lang.
If you're joining us on Zoom, if you could please mute your mics.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is the 9:30 Herpetology Working Group meeting brought to you virtually. I'm Dan Levitt. I'll be going through a brief agenda and then we'll get right into our first item of the morning. I wanted to just mention one thing for housekeeping's sake. If you would ensure that you are muted if you are attending on Zoom. If you have questions, please post them in the chat box. You can also use the raise hand function if you're having difficulty and somebody can respond to you directly. So I'll jump right into our next slide. On the slide presentation you should be seeing on your front screen. So hoping to spend, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. If somebody could please mute themselves. This morning, we'll be doing a technical session Q&A. There are a number of presentations that were provided prior to the meeting by our presenters. If you are on the Pathable site, below the presenters' names and below our description of our session, you'll find 5 presentations. And we're going to be conducting a question and answer session right now for our presenters who put all of this content together, starting shortly. Following that at about 10:15 a.m., we'll be holding, this is the Pacific time, of course, because Dave and I are on Pacific time. We're not on Central time like the rest of the conference. At 10:15 a.m., we'll be switching over into our working group meeting, the Herpetology Working Group meeting, which will take place for a half hour. We'll have elections and open forum discussion regarding our content. So without belaboring the agenda, we'll jump into the Q&A session now. And I wanted to point out something for you all on the Pathable site. Dave, can you take control of the screen and show folks on the Pathable site where the presentations can be found?
You have to transfer host to me.
Okay. Maybe I'll just do that myself then.
Do you see mine?
Hey, Chad, I'm glad you're here. I was just trying to share it with you. Are you trying to share it now? Yes,
Yeah,
I do.
mine
Thank you.
should be
Yes,
up,
I got
maybe.
you. Yep. So if you
So
would,
everybody that,
you go ahead, Dave.
oh, so here on Pathable, many of you might be joined up here, so you may see a slightly different window with the video playing, but down here on the lower right, as you first enter the page, is the chat. Feel free to ask questions in there, and we will try and post up answers as replies so that they'll stick with the questions as we move along.
Do you want to handle that first question about the ABBA song, Dave?
I'm not going to sing any ABBA today. I'm
Okay.
afraid of
Sorry,
copyright.
Jay.
Copyright restrictions, Jay. Otherwise, I would.
Well, if you hadn't already had a chance to take a look at some of the presentations, there are a number of really great ones. I did want to start off by asking a general question of all of our presenters, and it relates specifically to one of the important topics that's coming up this year that Dave will be hosting a special session this Wednesday on COVID. And I wanted to ask the presenters the good and the bad and the ugly aspects of COVID as it relates to their field work and any insights they might provide us. The point of the herpetology working group is to share information specifically about the technological advances in the field and challenges in the field. And I would like to hear from our presenters any insights they might have, good, bad, ugly, about COVID. Anybody want to take that one first? All right, Wade. Go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Sure. Hi, I'm Wade. I'm at Texas A&M University, and I gave the presentation on camera traps or camera monitoring of secretive snakes. And the whole reason we developed that style of monitoring was because we were working on installations that were mission heavy, and we couldn't be out there all the time. And so in deploying that sort of method, when COVID hit, a lot of our projects, so a benefit, just totally by accident, was that, we were able to collect data, even though we had a lot of travel restrictions, state institution, and they had a lot of travel restrictions on us. So that was a benefit and if you haven't seen the talk, basically we're monitoring snakes in a nutshell. You have box traps with fences. We replaced the box trap with a camera trap that takes a lot of pictures of the ground on a time-lapse trigger. So go check out the talk if you want to see more about that. But yeah, that was a real benefit to us. We were able to keep a lot of projects going, even though we couldn't be on site. And I'll stop.
Thanks, Wade. Yeah, I know we had a lot of different folks. Steve, did you have something you wanted to add to that? Steve, we can see that you're talking, but we're not hearing you. Your audio seems to not be coming over. So we'll come back to Steve while he's getting his audio up. Chad, would you like to handle that one?
Yeah, sure. So luckily for tourist work, it's kind of a solitary thing to begin with. It was just myself and one other technician that we had. So we tried to stay as socially distant as we could. We all, sometimes we have kind of communal equipment. We were able to kind of create kits for each individual person. So, each person had their own thing, so we could kind of do our own thing. We didn't have to transfer equipment or anything like that. And as far as staying distant in the field, we were camping out in the middle of the Sonoran Desert during the summertime. So we were all pretty distant from each other anyway. But luckily in this sense, it didn't have any major repercussions. We were able to kind of deal with it. We all drove separately, did our own thing. Yeah, so for tourist work, it wasn't a huge hindrance. We were able to deal with it and kind of roll with the punches.
I wanted to say real fast, if that's okay, I really enjoyed your presentation, Wade, because the base I work on, Moody Air Force Base in Georgia, we only have access to about half of the property for about 2 hours a day and about one weekend a month. So it's pretty limited access. It's used for air training a whole lot. So they limit it for safety purposes. So I really loved the idea of working camera traps into that even more than we already do, as opposed to just being able to check a drift fence for the 2 weeks of a year that we can. So thank you for sharing that.
Thanks for the insight there. And folks, just so if you're joining us now, there are a number of presentations. All of the ones that are on the screen, in fact, are should be accessible to you below the chat box. You should be able to watch any of these presentations. And we have a few questions that have come up in the chat box, and I wanted to address them, but I wanted to let you all know that we have a kind of a potpourri of presentations, everything from rattlesnakes to turtles to snakes. Lots and lots of really great herpetological research and monitoring that's been presented to us. So please take your time to check them all out. Liz, did you want to address that question about the good, the bad, and ugly of COVID as it relates to your fieldwork?
Yeah, sure. I don't know that I have much good or in terms of insights to offer, but we weren't able to actually have a field season last year, but luckily the team up at Camp Grayling in the environmental office was really, really helpful and engaged, and they helped us finish a bit of our field work while we were still in Indiana down here. Just the university regulations kept us from going up. But it did allow for closer collaboration and more opportunity to prepare for this season. So we're really ready to get started in April. So.
Thanks. And I just wanted to check with Steve Stocking to see if your audio has improved, if your ability to respond has improved at all.
I think so. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. It's all you, Steve.
Okay. All right. Yeah, at Nellis Air Force Base, and the challenges we had were actually, well, I think when COVID first hit, there was kind of a down period where everybody tried to deal with the challenges of closing everything down. But after a few weeks, the 99th Civil Engineering Squadron, which we fall under, was declared mission essential. And after that, we were pretty much operating at full capacity. We had to institute masks and social distancing and those sorts of COVID restrictions. But from that point on, we operated pretty much the full season as we normally would have, just with some COVID, again, social distancing type restrictions and limitations. But we were pretty much fully operational entire season. And it didn't affect our ability to access our dens in April and October.
Thanks, and I'm glad your audio is working. So no offense to Jay's question, but the first legitimate question that we got in our chat box that I can see is from Bob Schallman. He's asking Wade Ryberg, did you have any issues with cameras being tampered with or worse, potentially stolen?
Hi, this is Wade again. Yes, in a couple of places where we've done work, it's been on public land, and so you always run the risk there of camera, nothing on DoD, and we've kind of just chalked it. I mean, we're just gonna lose some cameras sometimes. It's very rare because a lot of times, we're setting up these sampling arrays in areas that are hard to get to. So long, far away from roads, things like that. And so I guess we've had 50 cameras going in the field for like the last 6 years, and we've only lost 2. So that is, we've only lost 2. So that's not, that's good. We thought we were going to lose a lot more actually when we started doing this work. So, but usually there's no tampering. It's either they're going to take it or or they haven't found it because the cameras are expensive.
And then another one for you, Wade, from Kurt Mosley. Specifically, if the camera trap setup was effective for other things like small mammals or lizards, that kind of stuff, did you want to address that a little bit more?
Yeah, they work great for lizards and small mammals. We had a question in the chat also about being able to focus closely on like small snakes, for example. So kind of dropping the camera down close to the ground. And we use Reconyx cameras, and that manufacturer will allow you to modify the focal distance on the camera to whatever your needs are. so you can get a closer focal distance if you want to be, tight against the ground for small snake ID. In general, the places where we kind of have a list of the taxa that are there, the species that are there, and it hasn't been too difficult to identify, individuals down to species, both in mammals and lizards and snakes, turtles, obviously. I think it just kind of depends on how diverse the area is that you're working with. If it's a bad picture, it's a bad picture, and you're probably not going to be able to ID it. But the troubleshooting, once you start this approach, it doesn't take that long to figure out kind of like what the right distance from the ground is for whatever your target species is, and then you're off and running, and ID is pretty easy.
All right, thank you very much. So I'm going to skip ahead, quite a few questions there for Wade. So Wade, if you wouldn't mind maybe potentially responding if we don't find time for all of them in the chat box. But I did want to ask this general question to presenters, another great one from Bob Schallman. If you would address any issues that you might have had performing research with safety or security, any lessons learned that you might be able to share with the group specifically about safety and security. And I would go first to Louise, if you would.
So my event, obviously, it took place a couple of years ago, fall of 2018, spring of 2019. So obviously COVID wasn't an issue at the point. But when you're working with citizen science, especially, there's a lot more safety and security that has to be taken into consideration. Sorry, my cat keeps trying to photobomb. So if he appears, that's what that is. Yeah, definitely when you're planning large scale events that involve citizen science, like BioBlitz events, when you're inviting people from the community to come in and work on these areas that are government property, it's definitely important to plan ahead, make sure potentially if you don't necessarily have paramedics on site, make sure that there is first aid, that people have gone through some sort of, I don't know, not like preliminary training, but if you don't know what it is, don't grab it, essentially. Make sure everyone's aware of all the important field rules. But yeah, I'm really interested to hear what other people have to say when they're working in more remote areas.
Yeah, thanks. I figured we'd go to Chad next, and we'll ask all of the presenters the same questions. If they had any issues or insights they could share specifically towards safety and security with your project.
Yeah, so for my project, the tortoise work that we were doing was pretty close to the international border. So we had to coordinate ahead of time with the Luke Air Force Base where our work took place and make sure that, they understood when and where we were going to be. It was a weekly occurrence. Luckily, the tortoise project that we were working on was all within the same location, so we didn't have to change it week to week, but we did need to let them know, what our dates were several weeks in advance. And then when we were actually out in the field, we had to kind of have an understanding between all the folks that were working on the project that if you saw something or that, made you feel uncomfortable, folks, crossing or potentially carrying drugs or things like that, it was, if you see it, report it to the other folks in the group. And then we would all just kind of decide to call it a day at that point, and then kind of head back into town, regroup, and notify anyone that needed to be notified, and then just kind of decide on how to move forward from there. Luckily, we didn't have any issues like that. It was really quiet out there. We never saw anybody or anything going on, but there definitely was evidence everywhere. Years worth of garbage and stuff kind of from crossers and things of that nature, but no issues to talk about. It was just kind of be logical and sensible while we're out there and make sure everyone knew how to handle the situation and make sure everyone was notified ahead of time. So that's kind of how we addressed it.
And just as a side note from personal experience, if you ever want a lesson in safety, work with Chad Rubke. He's a very, very safe person in the field. I'll ask the same question of Wade Ryberg, whom I would say is pretty safe, but I'll let him answer it.
Can you hit me with a question again? I'm sorry. I've been doing the chat thing.
Yeah. It's a general question. Did you have any issues performing your research with safety or security? I mean, you guys were doing a lot of remote work with camera traps. So maybe during setup or even takedown.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the usual stuff. We're kind of digging fences, so there's all the, sweeping. You got to get a dig permit, all that kind of stuff. Make sure you're not digging in the wrong spot. And but yeah, that all is, just got to get your paperwork in with enough time. But yeah, no safety precautions really. Like you said, most of our stuff's remote.
Thanks, Wade. And Steve Stocking gave a presentation. If you haven't seen it, it's pretty amazing. It's on monitoring rare and secretive snakes or sorry, that's not his. His is the rattlesnake dens. And Steve, I would just shoot the same question over to you. Going in and out of those dens, working with the equipment you had, were there any issues general to safety and security that you wanted to share with the group?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Thank you for that. Just a couple of points on the access issues on the security side. We have to be escorted by either a military personnel or a government civilian or another contractor that has clearance on the range. And that's all coordinated and scheduled in several weeks in advance by the Nellis Natural Resources Program Office. And so from a security perspective, we have an escort, and they actually have radio contact with the overall range control personnel. And so if in the event of an urgent situation or an emergency, they can contact personnel, and there are based, resources, emergency and fire department in the event of an emergency. Particular to our projects on our den sites, the one site where we were handling snakes in a snake tube, we were very cognizant of that. If we did get, for example, a snake bite, we're probably a couple-hour drive from the nearest hospital. And so we took great pains, handling the snakes with tongs and snake hooks and putting them in buckets and managing them individually. And I think the one photo showed them in a snake tube. So we took great pains to be very careful and process each snake one at a time. And we have two biologists coordinating that very closely. And I think we have good procedures in place, and our risk is pretty low of getting bit, as well as minimizing the stress on the animals, get them processed, and then get them released back at the site as soon as possible. So we didn't have a bite. We haven't had a bite yet. I don't plan on having a bite, but we constantly, that's kind of at the top of our list of reviewing our procedures and making sure we're doing this in a safe and effective manner.
And I'll move over to Liz with the same question, but then Steve, I think we'll be coming back to you on Pathable. We have a question from Chris Fraunhofer specific to your project. But Liz, I wanted to ask you specifically to yours in regards to safety and security. You were doing quite a bit of field work out there. Any lessons learned that you might share about your turtle work?
Yeah, we had a number of precautions in place. Like Stephen was just talking about, we did schedule with the range control at Camp Grayling to make sure that we were never out on sites where there was active firing. A lot of our turtles were using sites that were active training areas. So we needed to work with them pretty closely. We also always went out in teams when it was possible, and we were required to have radios on site. So we did hourly check-ins with the range control just to make sure that everybody was on the same page, which was really helpful. And then at the beginning of the season, we did just some trainings with Camp Grayling, unexploded ordnance trainings, just because the places in the site had been used for about 100 years. So there were some risks involved in anything that could have been left over at the site. And then the last thing was just that there are rattlesnakes on site. So we also, anyone who was going to be working with them or helping with any like movement if they were in the areas that people were training. We just did hook training at the beginning. So I think that's all. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Dave, are you ready to jump into your ABBA song yet, or are we going to move on to another question?
We should keep going with questions, definitely.
All right, no dancing queen yet, folks. Good morning, Heifel. Rob wanted us all to say good morning to Heifel. So good morning, Heifel. Hope you're having a great day. And Wade, we got a question here. I think this is for you. It's from Kurt Mosley, specific to finding a minimum survey period needed for cameras to detect most or all snake species. So how long, I suppose, how long were you leaving the cameras out before you started to reach that asymptote of species in the community?
Oh, I guess some okra.
That's a good question. We haven't actually analyzed the data in that way to kind of get the species accumulation curve, but we should. That's a good idea. I will say that, we've been leaving our cameras out all year long, and part of the reason for doing that is to, discover maybe things that we had taken for granted about the activity season on some of the species, like maybe they are more active in cooler months. Activity seasons with climate change and changes in weather patterns. So we've been leaving them out all year long. But so I hope that answers the question. That is a good idea, looking at the species accumulation curve part, though. Our goal is to get as many quote unquote recaptures of the target species as possible. So we kind of just been leaving them out there the whole time.
Great. And a similar one for Louise, your BioBlitz effort, I assume you'll be doing that again. And have you thought any bit about how often or how frequently you'll return to doing another BioBlitz in order to get that kind of maximum? Also kind of follow on to that, are there any species in particular you're looking to record on site?
So our BioBlitz took place a little bit offsite at a recreation area, which makes things a little bit different. It's surrounded by agriculture, some timber areas. There's a wastewater spraying field nearby. So there's definitely some species that, to answer the second part of your question, there's a farmer or a guy that does his land for timber nearby. I would not be surprised if he had some indigos around there. I would love to be able to catch them crossing over onto our territory. I've seen some coach whips there that we did not get to record during our first BioBlitz. So there's a couple of species that I personally have my eyes on for personal and for professional reasons. As far as when to do it again, obviously we'd have to wait until COVID passes or it's safe to gather again in large groups. But we had some really good collaborators with Valdosta State University, the local university. So I would really love to see if we could get some undergraduate courses involved, maybe some people studying education in addition to people studying biology. So the last one was, coming up on 3 years ago. So I'd love to potentially do one every 3 to 5 years to see how our baseline is changing and to kind of get more and more people involved, even with things like and the entomology part of it, some of the microalgae that was identified. I'd love to kind of broaden into that a little bit more. So yeah. And I was going to add on to the earlier question about safety and security. Since the BioBlitz does involve a lot of untrained citizens involved on these nature hikes, there was a coral snake found at both the fall and the spring events. So I think it's really important when you're planning those events in areas where there are potentially venomous snakes present to make sure that you have a very good ratio of professionals to citizens to make sure that everyone is essentially being accounted for at all times, and make sure no one's trailing in the back and says, oh, what's that red worm? And, picks up a coral snake. So that was a really interesting point that you all made me think about. So thank you for bringing that to the front of my mind.
Cool. And we actually, Liz asked a question specific to your project, Louise, and I figured we'd just ask it now. Any challenges or tips you might offer us on public engagement? And we have quite a few people here on the chat, and they might be doing BioBlitzes on their site in the future. Any tips for engaging the public in citizen science, and specifically, what sort of demographics do you see at your events?
That is a really great question. I have the benefit in that I personally have been doing a lot of like science center talks for years. So I had the experience of being able to break things down into small pieces for everybody from a 4 and 5-year-old to a 60-year-old that shows up chewing tobacco and doesn't really want to hear about snakes, but you can maybe convince him that they're helpful for his crops, and he doesn't really need to kill everything he sees on site. So that was kind of the first lesson I learned, was make sure that everything you're saying is accessible and applicable to the wide variety of people that are going to show up to these specific events. They may show up because they just happen to be fishing that day and your BioBlitz is right next door, or they may be a kid with a bug box that's super excited about science and really wants to hear about bugs and wants to just pick your brain for hours and hours. I was not actually employed at the time when this specific BioBlitz occurred, so I was not at this specific event. But in other BioBlitzes I've attended in the past and been able to be part of, there's been a lot of people that have been either parts of local birding clubs. They were at the zoo when they saw the flyer. So there were already people there that were interested in science and interested in animals or interested in the outdoors. I think in the future, I'd love to figure out from my friends that work in education on how to draw in more people that would be interested if they knew it existed. If they don't normally run in those circles, if they don't attend their zoos or their local nature centers, but they would be interested in attending something like this if they knew it happened. So maybe trying to come up with some ways to broaden your outreach to the community or your advertising, I suppose, to make sure as many people as possible hear that it's going to happen. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, that's a good one. We have a few others. Corinne, I believe what you're looking for is the link below the description of the herpetology working group section. We have all of our presentations that are on the screen right now. You can find the content for each of these right here. What we're holding is a question and answer session to discuss those, but you're welcome to at any time during this week and I believe for a little while after, watch all of these presentations. We strongly encourage folks to do so. And it looks like Louise has also provided an answer as well. Let's see. I know we had a few other questions in here we hadn't gotten to. So Chris had a question for Steve Stocking. I don't know if Steve, you had a chance to take a look at this yet, but it's very specific to the antennas and batteries used with the antennas. Could you address that one?
Yeah, in fact, thanks for that question. I just had a chance to go back and look at Pathable and look at those questions. Yeah, the batteries that worked best with our IS 1001 reader and the 25-foot antenna, a low amperage, a low voltage antenna, were we ended up with a couple of different brands, a Duracell deep cycle marine battery in the 100 or 110 amp hour range, and then there's another brand of Centennial is another one where we've got a couple of batteries that are 115 amp hours. And as far as the solar unit, in fact, we just got it in the mail the other day. It's out in our garage here, and I have to unpack it and get into the particulars. But we have a 315 watt solar panel. It's about 3 foot by 5 foot, and we will haul that up to the site and set that up. And based on the performance characteristics on everything I'm reading, and what Biomark is telling me, that should keep the batteries fully charged for the length of a deployment period out there. We plan to deploy the pit tag readers up at the den site here this spring for 5 or 6 weeks, starting in late March. So we hope to get movement data on everybody that we have pit tag that comes in and out. And we also hope to get up there a couple of times during April, kind of the peak egress window, and collect as many as we can to get measurements, to get demographic measurements, and any additional adult snakes we'd missed, we would add to the study by pit tagging them as well. So I hope that answers your question on our equipment. And feel free to give me a call, or we can talk offline as well if anybody has questions about how we're doing this.
Thanks, Steve. So we got a really good question here in the chat box, and I think that this is I think it was drawn out by Louise's presentation on the BioBlitz, but I think it could be applicable to all of our presenters because they are actively engaged in work on DoD installations and recording information. And I wanted to ask you all, and I'll go through each of you, if you have any challenges in getting proper permissions to use citizen science apps that record photos, species locations, on military installations, any workarounds you might be able to provide us or any suggestions that have worked for you in particular. I know that there's quite a bit of variety out there, and I'd like to start with Wade.
In general, we've avoided using those kinds of apps on DoD installations, but I guess we never asked, to be honest with you. So I was a bad person to start with. I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. You guys are working with a museum, so all of your recordings are going straight to the museum, I assume, and into data collections.
That's correct. That's correct. So there's going to be a filter there also on some of those records, if you will.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's helpful in itself, Wade. There's information there. How about you, Chad? Is there anything you can add to that?
Yeah, so kind of along the lines of Wade there, in general, we kind of avoided it just with the Tortoise project. But kind of thinking back to some other projects we've had on the same installation, I believe we spoke about it with our points of contact with the Luke Air Force Base, and they were fine with it as long as there was a significant difference from like the time of reporting and when it was posted. And they did want to be able to review it just to make sure that, we weren't putting anything out there that, could be sensitive information or anything like that. But so we never posted it, immediately or from the field or anything like that. We always kind of tried to include them and make sure they were ahead of it or knew about it ahead of time.
Thanks, Chad. Liz, any use of any of these citizen science apps during your research, or any issues with collecting data that was problematic for you on Camp Grayling?
Yeah, similar answer. We didn't really use apps, and we also avoided a lot of social media just for sensitive locality information. And actually, even when we interacted with people like from the public, we often would just use different species names just because it was easier, just to be safer in case. Outside of research, I've definitely loved using citizen science apps and using them for like herpetology club projects or our environmental resources center here at Purdue Fort Wayne, but not during the turtle research. So.
Okay. And how about you, Steve? You're on a pretty sensitive location. I imagine sharing data in any citizen science platform is frowned upon.
Well, in general, yes. The Nevada Test and Training Range, the security protocols are pretty strict. You can't take a cell phone on, or an iPad, or a laptop computer, with some exceptions. And I think we're starting to get some I don't want to call loosening of the rules, but going through their process and getting advanced approval on a very specific, unique equipment that's screened, and allowing us to take it on the range. Having said that, we collect all our data with approved GPS Trimble Trimble Juno units, and we get downloaded and process it, and it gets all QA'd through the Nevada or the Nellis Natural Resources Program and is put in to the Air Force SDSF-IE database. But as far as using a citizen science app, there's going to be some challenges in probably doing that on a wide scale basis, particularly on the Nevada Test and Training Range. I do have some experience with those off the range. I do a lot of volunteer work with the Nevada Department of Wildlife, and they're pretty good at using those kinds of resources. But it's probably an education of the Air Force leadership to open up the aperture on something like that.
Thanks, and I'll send that question over to Louise, specific to were you using any sort of citizen science applications on your study?
iNaturalist was a huge part of our study, which thankfully ours was through it was an off-site recreational area. It was not directly adjacent to the base, and we cleared it through public affairs ahead of time. So we didn't have any issues with that in particular, but if I were to do, when I do my research on base, there's definitely, I think in general, as other people have said, going through a public affairs office or through whoever your point of contact with is always a good idea. It's never going to be too much to double check that it's okay to send data or information to people. So yeah, ours was a special case, but I could definitely see that being more complicated if you're working with spotted turtles or other more sensitive species in sensitive areas.
Thank you. And I just wanted to address something else that Bob Schallman shared in the chat. He said that at Seal Beach here in California, they have challenges with sharing observations found on the installation because access is restricted. For iNaturalist, he uses the obscured private feature. And for eBird, he has a pinned location at the front gate of his installation. So the record is there, but it's coming at that specific location. And then I wanted to, since we have a little bit of time before we turn into another group entirely or turn into another part of our session, there's another question from Kevin Haynes specific to how GIS was integrated into field work, and this can be kind of a broad question, but I suppose in the finest sense of that question is where I'd start with Wade. Do you use GPS units to collect your data? Do you use tablets that have any sort of geolocation to them, or are you simply just collecting the data in the field and then using GIS on the background?
Yeah, it's the latter. The old-fashioned way, I guess, is where we're on. You need sorry, I'm kind of catching up between chats. Was there a second part to that question?
No, I think you got it. You guys
Okay,
are using GIS, but you're using it on the backside.
That's right.
All right. And Chad, are you guys using anything in the field that would be like a Trimble unit or anything specific like that?
Nothing specific like that. No Trimbles, just your standard handheld Garmin units. Everything, of course, is recorded in the field using one of those. And then once the field season is kind of completed, we bring all that data into the an office setting, and then we download all that, and then kind of work with those GIS systems kind of on the back end. But GIS definitely kind of ahead of time and with like planning and access and things like that. But as far as like the field season goes, everything's kind of on the handheld units. And then once we get back from the field, again, it's kind of using those GIS systems.
And Liz, your project was very spatial. How did GIS become incorporated into your study? Was it in the field, or was it something that you did on the back end?
Yeah, my answer is actually almost exactly the same as Chad's. We use satellite imagery to identify locations that we surveyed at. This was the first study of those turtles at that site. So sort of just exploring the area initially, and then we just used handheld GPS units in the field. And then definitely extensive use of GIS after we got out and looking at habitat classification, that sort of thing. So.
Steve, your locations are very specific. I assume that nothing unique or special equipment-wise is required for GIS for you as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, the sites have clearly been there for some time and been around a long time. The how do I want to frame this, the answer to this question? I guess the secure nature of the site, I'm a little bit less concerned about exact coordinates or locations. If we were on public land, there's clearly concerns of sensitive sites like this being poached or otherwise damaged or interfered with, and I think that's a very low risk out here because these areas are closed to the public, and you're not going to get public access, and anybody's going to be able to. Not anyone can go out there and quote mess with the snakes, so to speak. Those military personnel and contract personnel that have access to the range know about the safety and security rules and stay away from the snakes generally as much as possible. So there's a minimal conflict, and I think there's as long as the sites aren't developed or there's an Air Force need to completely remodel or redevelop the sites, I think the risk of losing these in the short term are pretty low, if that makes sense.
I believe it does. If you didn't see just my face, you'd see me nodding along with you. Well, I want to thank all of our presenters for the wonderful content that they pre-recorded for us. Again, if you have not had a chance to see their presentations, much of the discussion has been revolving around it. I'm going to share my screen here on the Pathable site. You're on the front end. You see here where we are. At the bottom here, you can click any one of these projects and go right into it and watch the video of that specific project. You have the presenter's name at the bottom, so you can go and you can contact that individual in Pathable if you have more questions after the technical session. Of course, you'll be able to interact with this content through the time. And there's also a place where you can provide comments like this one here. Nice work, Chad. I just wanted to say thank you to all of our presenters for pre-recording all this content. There are lots and lots of questions in the chat box currently. There's a lot of conversation that is going on all sorts of topics, which I think is very helpful. And I wanted to also point out to a number of folks on our chat that there are other group meetings that will be taking place during this week, specific to GIS, specific to birds, specific to a variety of topics that they might be able to get their answers from other locations. But I also encourage folks to use the chat box as much as they can. But at this moment in time, we're going to start switching gears into our next aspect of our working group meeting. Our working group for the herpetology working group has held elections every year, and that is to ensure that we have fresh and responsive leadership. And the way that our charter is posted is that we would have a chair and a past chair. And so Dave McNaughton will be stepping down from his role as co-chair this year, and we have received one nomination. I'll point you in the direction of on the Pathable site. Once again, we have a poll set up. So if you go into your section of the Pathable site, there's a poll, and we have a nomination for Chris Frauenhofer to be a co-chair, and you can click on that link. Though I would also open the floor up at this point to any additional nominations for potential co-chairs that we may have. And I'm going to open that floor up by suggesting that folks chat in the chat box any nominees that they might have for a co-chair for the herpetology working group for 2021, and it would be serving until 2023. And we'll just take a couple minutes for folks to go over to the poll and check that out. But if we do have any additional nominees, we can also update our poll, and we'll inform everybody that the poll has been updated, so then we can have a discussion if we need to.
Dan, while you're doing that, could we have maybe Chris introduce himself a little bit, since he is definitely nominated?
Absolutely. Chris, are you online?
Yes, can you hear me?
We sure can. The floor is yours. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Maybe give us a sense of where you work, all that stuff.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for the nomination. I appreciate it. I am currently the biologist for the Utah Army National Guard. I work primarily at Camp Williams, which is about 50 miles south of Salt Lake City, but we support all the Guard installations throughout the state. I have, I'm originally though from the East Coast, and prior to moving out and working at Camp Williams, I did a lot of work in the Northeast with turtles and salamanders, and they'll always be a big love of mine. But recently I've been working at Camp Williams, particularly with snakes, and we've been doing some work similar to Stevens with Great Basin rattlesnakes, and that's been really great, and I hope to look forward to share some of that stuff with the group as it develops as well. Yeah, again, I'd be an honor to serve as a co-chair, and thanks again for the nomination.
Thanks for the introduction, Chris. We really appreciate it. Also, we'll really appreciate you willing to be stepping up and offer your leadership. Also, shout outs for appreciation to the photographer, Rob Lovich, who says he loves that picture of Dave because he took it. Wonderful picture. And it is, I assume, at the Yuma Territorial Prison, Dave. I don't know.
It's the old San Diego jail cell right near work.
Ah, I got it. I just assumed.
Far to get busted.
But it could be from any one of many NMFWAs in my past.
Nice.
I'll also say, just briefly, that everything from the question and answer session has been recorded and will be up immediately after the session. And the chat should stay up for the rest of the week, if not for several weeks, as well as the presentation. So feel free to circle back and look for further answers.
And we'll be leaving the poll up so you can go in, and just a reminder for folks who have not already done so, we still have only the one nomination. We have people commenting, though we still have the one nomination, one for Chris Fraunhofer. So you can go in there and you can select yes or no. And then once selected, you'll be able to see the breakdown in percentages and whatnot. And we'll have this step done for that point in time. Dave, I'm going to move on to the next item in our working group. Did you have anything else on this slide? All right.
Except to say thank you for a couple of years of input and participation, and I hope that you'll do the same for Chris when he comes in.
Oh, absolutely. I will give him the same expert advice that you gave me. So at this point, we are in open forum, and I really appreciated a number of the questions that folks were sending in through the chat box. And I think I'd like to continue using that function if we could. using the chat box for our open forum specific to the herpetology working group. If you have any questions specific to reptile and amphibian conservation, management, techniques, if you're seeking out some opinion, reviews, whatever it may be, policy, this is the time for us to have these discussions. And so that's one item for us. And then the other item, next year we'll be holding a technical forum again, we assume, here at NMFWA, and potentially we'd like to have that maybe focus on a specific topic that might be of interest to the group. And so if you have any items that you think are important or maybe very relevant in the next year or so, please add that to the chat box as well at this time, specific to the herpetology working group.
I'll get us started with the topic. Is anybody using Herp Mapper currently and assisting DoD Park with the installation inventories?
Our herpetology club uses Herp Mapper for reporting. If that's what you're wondering, we've pretty much exclusively worked through Herp Mapper at Purdue Fort Wayne.
Yeah, hey, this is Chris. I use it all the time, actually, and a lot of people do. I mean, if you get in there, there's over 5,000 records in Herp Mapper specifically on DoD sites, so people are using it quite a bit.
This is Bob at Seal Beach.
This is Ryan O'Donnell with Arizona Game and Fish. We've used it in both directions. So we've submitted data to Herp Mapper from inventory projects we've been doing. We've also used others' data that have been submitted to Herp Mapper to contribute to those inventories, and iNaturalist as well. Those two, we've used data in both directions from both of those platforms.
This is Bob at Seal Beach. I use it, but I don't know how many more gopher snake, side blotch lizard, and western fence lizard records are really needed in Herp Mapper. That's really all I have.
It's a nice break from fence lizards on the East Coast, so it's nice to see something different every once in a while. It's fun to see what other people are running into.
And I know that when I first started using iNaturalist, Chris and Rob from DoD Park both introduced me to Herp Mapper, and I was hesitant to switch over just because all of my content was already in iNaturalist. And so for me personally, I do more than just reptiles and amphibians with regard to what I'm collecting data on. And so I didn't want to have too many things that were too specific because it was becoming too complex really for me to organize and handle.
Hey, Dan.
Yes, go ahead, Steve.
I've got a quick question, I guess probably for you and Chris, because you talked about your best management practices and everything you've put together at the DoD Park level, and capitalizing these citizen science databases. Do you have access to the the official DoD sources such as the SDSF IE data set, which is ultimately where all our data goes and it goes up the Air Force chain of command and consolidated in their database? Do you have access to that data as well?
Yeah, hey, this is Chris. Yeah, we definitely do. We have a GIS shapefile which contains hundreds of military sites, primarily polygon boundary layers. And we use that as the basis for determining when someone enters a record into Herp Mapper.
I guess just trying to think it through a little bit, because we've put all of our data into that SDSFIE database that the Air Force consolidates for all its installations. If we also start using something like Herp Mapper, do you have a kind of a data conflict? Are we double counting animals or observations? And do you have the ability to deconflict that, I guess?
Yes, I do have the ability to not double count. And so when someone enters a Herp Mapper record on a military site, the general public sees it only at the county level. Rob and I are the only ones that see the exact lat long of that entry. And I just this year, just last month, I took all 5,000 of the Herp Mapper records, went into our Herp database and added a column. And if there was an observation in Herp Mapper, I noted that in the database. And now we're tracking that data as well. So there shouldn't be double counts. Now, here's another development. We've been trying to develop a partnership with iNaturalist. And to be honest, they weren't as enthusiastic as the Herp Mapper folks were. But we did find out that you can actually download iNaturalist data at the lat long level through GBIF, it's called, Global Biodiversity Information Facility. And we're going to start using those data as well to update our herpetofauna database. And there's literally thousands of observations in there specific to military installations just for herps. And it's probably tens of thousands if you expand out to other taxa.
Yeah, the real convenience for using Herp Mapper is to just be able to walk around using your phone and catch or just document with a photo. And then the output is an Excel spreadsheet, which can then be used to create that SDSFI database that's a requirement for GIS, but the actual data of the species records is pretty slick, being able to do it with a cell phone, and you don't even have to have a continuous signal. You can upload whenever you get back to a place that does.
Thanks for the discussion on that one, folks. I just wanted to address a couple of things that have come up in the chat box. First off, Todd Wills says, hey, don't forget we have a Herp working group newsletter. He's always looking for articles to include. So anybody who has something of interest in their local news that may be related to your work or work that's taking place nearby, please send it over to Todd Wills. And if you're not familiar with how to get a hold of Todd Wills, please contact him on the chat here, and he'll be happy to add you to our working group newsletter listserv. Also, I wanted to point out a couple things. We have, if you go to the files section, we have the working group webpage, our charter, and then Louise has added the results of the fall and spring BioBlitz from her study in Georgia to the files here. And just a reminder of the content that we have below. And in addition to that, we had a comment about a suggested topic for next year's technical session, which is, thanks Todd for adding your email, impacts of climate change on herpetofauna on DoD lands from Gene. That was a suggestion. And then we had another specific question to Wade's study, and it looks like he's handled that one.
And we should also mention the NMFWA site has a Herp working group page on there. We have the charter as well as several documents up there. We post the annual report when we have it done up there every year. And we also have a number of DoD parks disease publications up there right now, but we can always host more. So if you have content that would be broadly available, please email Dan or Chris Fraunhofer, looks like, with that information, and they can pass it along to the webmaster to get it up.
And also the website there. That's the best way to join the Herp working group. For folks that are here listening or watching today and you're not a member, go to the website, join the Herp group, and you'll get on the email list that way as well.
Yeah, and about 2 to 3 years ago, we took a vote of the entire working group and agreed to share permission to share those addresses over with Chris Peterson and DoD Park. So it's basically one ongoing listserv for both organizations. If you need to opt out of one or the other, please let us know.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Right now, the DoD Park listserv has about 550 people on it, and which is great. It means we're, casting the net wide, which is great. And we're always welcome for more. And, like, we don't send out emails every day or every week. It's every month, if that. So don't think that we're going to be bombarding your email with lots of messages and things. We're sensitive of that because, we don't like that either.
Maybe an Aussie video or two if you're lucky.
And beyond the content that we've posted onto this site, Chris, Rob, did you guys also have content added to your files section on the DoD Park site?
Yeah, we sure did. We had loaded up the 2020 annual report. We loaded the commander's guide, which you can download. And then we added 2 YouTube videos. One is snake safety on DoD lands, which is really, really well done. And then we had the snake fungal swabbing video that the University of Illinois developed for us. So if those of you out there who are participating in the snake fungal disease survey this year and you want to get, refresh your memory on how to do it, that's out there as well.
Thanks for that. I haven't seen any additional suggestions for things that we can prioritize this year for you or topics of interest for next year's technical forum. So it looks like we're going to be trying to seek out some speakers who can address the effects or impacts of climate change on herpetofauna on DoD land specifically. And there's quite a few number of folks on this line. So if anybody has any suggestions of potential speakers, of potential projects they've heard of, or locations that might be appropriate that they'd like to hear from, please enter those into the chat box as well, so that it'll give us a good head start, if you will, because Chris and I are both on the West Coast, and so there may be some folks working on the East Coast or even overseas who may have access to other information specific to that topic. And Michael just shared with us that the information is going to remain on Pathable for 6 months. So wonderful news on that. So you'll have some time to access it.
Yeah, and the working group's not due to present a technical session next year, but we can always put it forward. We can put one forward every year. Usually the old rules said that we would have one every other year with just a meeting in between.
If we're not talking about herps, then what are we talking about?
Exactly. We all want to talk herps, so I'm sure it'll be accepted.
Amen.
Neil, appreciate your COVID swabbing. I'm glad that the Snake Fungal Disease Project was able to give you a head start on learning how to swab for COVID.
If you have any damaged scales, Neil, don't put those in the COVID tube.
Well, Dave, we're running close to time here. This may be your last herpetology working group as a co-chair. Did you want to start singing ABBA now, or do you want to wait until just a minute before we cut out?
Sure, I'll start singing now. Here you go. Let me know if you can't hear me.
Dave must have gone to mute. Lonnie, I saw that you joined in. Did you have something you wanted to address? Okay. Well, once again, I want to thank everybody for your attendance, the comments in the chat box, the presentations that are on the site. If you haven't had a chance, I'm going to do one more plug for them. If you don't know where they are by now you will learn where they are. Right down here on the bottom of the site, a bunch of pre-recorded content for you to digest this week. I strongly encourage you to check them out. A lot of really interesting lessons learned. And really appreciate the speakers putting these together for us. And yeah, unless we have any additional questions, Dave and I will remain here, but it doesn't look like we're getting a lot of conversation through the chat.
Hey, Dan.
Yes, sir.
I think Dave is taking on a position with National Park, even though he's stepping down from this one. And I'm not sure if you mentioned that, but I wanted to congratulate Dave on that. And if you wanted to share a bit, or if I'm jumping the gun, cat's out of the bag now, Dave.
Which national park are you going to move to, Dave?
Montana. But yeah, no, I'm not actually.
I thought you were in consideration for being on the board there with Park, or is that already in play? It's not like you don't have other collateral duties, so just wanted to pat you on the back.
Park issues, you can always send them through myself or through Chris.
Cool.
Sheena asked an important question in the chat to clarify, if they're receiving emails from DoD Park, are we also automatically receiving emails from the Herp working group? I think that's a negative, Sheena. I think you need to sign up separately for each of those working groups. DoD Park is a separate entity from the herpetology working group, but as Bill pointed out, if you go to the files, I put the link for the herpetology working group on the site here, so you can click on this and it'll bring you over to the herpetology working group, and that's where you can get onto to sign up for that listserv. And then Rob, Chris, you guys want to give a plug for how to get onto yours?
Yeah, absolutely. All you have to do is shoot Rob and I an email, and we'll add you right away to the list. In fact, we probably had 10 people request to be signed up just this morning. I'll add my email and Rob's into the chat.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Also, just a clap or a pat on everybody's back. Junior Kern said, I'm remain impressed by how far DoD herpetology monitoring and management has advanced since beginning his career in 1977 and since his retirement in 2016. Everyone's doing incredible work. He remembers when reptiles and amphibians were not even considered in anything, so keep up excellent work.
Hey, Dan, there's a late question in from Cassidy on experience recapture outside of pit tagging. You want to tell her about ventral snake or ventral scale clips or whatever, but only for a season or two?
Yeah, you know, there's some generalized where you can go for that information. I feel like the publishers of Herpetologica, Rob, remind me, would have that. It's the monitoring and methodology, and plus we also have the park monitoring and methods guidelines. You want to address those?
Yeah, I'll have to see. I'm not sure Chris, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think the park guidelines are up as a PDF yet, are they? They were working towards that. Otherwise, there are books and or references. If you wanted to reach out, Cassidy, to Chris and Dan and I or Dave, we could guide you to some of the literature that lists those methods explicitly. And that has been done in a couple different ways. The reptile monitoring book had it, the park inventory and monitoring guide for herpetofauna. And then there have been many, many other publications that we could help guide you to without getting lost in oceans of literature.
And Cass has access to pit tags. That's probably still the best way for a long-term study right now, Cass.
Yeah, she asked about doing it without pit tags, Dave.
Okay.
But I feel you.
The park inventory and monitoring guide, which Dave just has in his hand right now, that is available electronically. If you go to the National Park website, you can download it as a PDF.
There you go. I'm glad.
And in general, I think that there's some methods where you can use paint, you can use a variety of clippings off of the snake. It just depends upon the type of study you want to do and the types of snakes you want to work with. So I think you'll be able to find that material if you were to go to that, and we can find the link and post it in the chat, Cassidy.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I was just wondering, we're looking to do heat branding with handheld cautery units, and I was wondering if anyone had experience, but yeah, I'll reach out to you guys to get some more literature information.
Perfect.
Well, folks, it is 10:46. Our meeting is now adjourning. And we will strongly encourage folks to keep up with the chat. And
holy moly.
Sorry, Ryan, I had to mute you. Encourage folks to keep up with the chat box, and please check out the content if you have not already done so. Thank you for your time today, and look forward to hearing from you all at many of the other meetings this week.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Awesome job.
Great job.
Thanks.
Thanks all.
Ryan, that's funny. The beard.
Dan, I don't know if you have to manually hit stop recording, but you can probably do that now.
Yeah, I was just giving it a second in case somebody wanted to address anything else before we were actually kicked out of the room.
Okay.
Sometimes, you know how it is. At the end of a meeting, sometimes folks go up to the podium at the end when there's a smaller group. And if there is anybody out there who's wanting to have any discussion or follow on, I encourage you you can also directly contact myself or Dave through the Pathable website and ask questions there if you didn't want to post anything. Yeah, so I'm going to stop recording, and I'm probably going to end the meeting now.
Oh, wait. Hey, hello.
Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me? Hey, this is Doug Burkett. Good job, you guys. You guys. It was scary for you guys. You guys were the kind of the kickoff working group and technical session, you know, and you guys made me feel a little bit better that maybe this is doable and won't screw it up too bad. But how did you switch back and forth between who was speaking and who was showing up on the screen? Does that make sense?
Who's showing up on the screen is automatic. We switched hosts off at the start of the meeting, but whoever gets into the Zoom room first will be your host until you so choose to hand it off. So if Charlie's in there before you are, Doug, then Charlie will be the host, vice versa if you get there first.
Oh, it's whoever gets to the Zoom room first is the host?
Yeah, the green room before the start of the session.
Oh, the green room. Okay, I gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah. Well done, and thanks for showing us how to do it. Yeah.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate that. It was easy because I had Dave there to help me walk through it all. And Vanessa was encouraging me quite a bit.
I can't say the same. Mine has been a struggle all morning.
Well, I'm gonna turn off the recording, and I'm gonna end the meeting. Thank you all, and talk to you very soon.
Oh wait, hey, one more question. For muting and unmuting people, do you control that or do they control it, right? They just unmute themselves like I did, and you can mute them going to the participants and mute them if you need to.
The host should be able to mute. So Dan had those controls. I shipped him off too early and didn't find out how to actually do that for you, but.
Doug, what I was doing was on an individual basis. If I saw that there was a person who might have had a lot of static or a lot of background, if I moused over their box, they would usually pop up to the front of my screen, and I could click mute. Like right now I could mute you, but I think you could unmute yourself, and I would just have to go back in and mute you if it was problematic. But it didn't happen too many times.
Okay, great, Dan. Thank you.
It wasn't ideal to have Dan actually hosting the meeting and also trying to deal with those issues, but we kind of got stuck there.
Yeah, I guess I really haven't figured out what the purpose of Zoom is and this, but
so that's where you have the ability to mute. You don't have it over in Pathable. All your controls and hosting, everything will be in Zoom. So just try and use Zoom as much as possible.
Okay. Yeah, if I went back and forth from Zoom to Pathable, it kicked me out and I had to log back in. But